What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to Celio's Network. Today I have over a dozen expanded deck lists for you guys. They're not all completely refined, but they are at the very least a start if you're interested in any of these decks, and I've put some time into a good bit of them. And I'll also have a spreadsheet link in the description below with importable copies of the deck lists if you'd like to just copy and paste them right into PTCGO. And without further ado, we're going to get started with Rayquaza. So Rayquaza, Jose Marrero won a regionals with it last year. I believe it was Hartford, the last expanded regionals of the season. I have not made too many changes to the deck. I do have a Pokemon Ranger in here since Mew 3 decks, Mewtwo and Mew tag teams can copy a lot of annoying attacks like Flash Ray, so I think Pokemon Ranger is a good option to have. And then if you think when we get closer to the tournament that maybe Jolteon EX is not making it excuse me, is not making it into a lot of decks, then you could just take Pokemon Ranger out for another consistency card. But for now, I think it's an okay inclusion to have. And if you think Shock Lock might be prevalent, you could add Stealthy Hood to protect your Virizion EX's Verdant Wind from being shut off by an Alolan Muck. And that should just auto-win you the matchup if they're not playing tool removal. I took a look at some older Shock Lock lists and also revised one for this video. But last year, some were not playing Goodra and not playing tool removal, so you could just get away with Stealthy Hooding a Verdant Wind. And so yeah, this list is very basic, so that's why I wanted to start off with this one. Not too many changes from last year's Ray list, but like I said, I like the Pokemon Ranger. Some things you'll notice missing from my lists right now is an Oricorio, which is a tech for Night March and Vespiquen. At the moment, Night March and Vespiquen aren't looking like they're going to be very popular in our meta, but if that changes, maybe the Ranger would come out for an Oricorio if you valued that tech a little more. Next, we'll be looking at Trevenant. So Trevenant, this did really well towards the end of last expanded season as well. I've added the Alolan Muck line into this list because of Mewtwo and Mew. If you can item lock the Mewtwo and Mew and get the Alolan Muck in, even if they get Stealthy Hood, you can just Faba it off. I think this can be really, really strong versus Mewtwo. But I've tested Mewtwo against this, and that's kind of my extent of testing against Trevenant in this expanded format. The rest is just theory crafting. But like I said earlier, I wanted to at least give you guys baseline lists to start off with. And I do think Trevenant is one of those decks that is not being looked at all right now, that could potentially really hurt deck building that is not prepared for it. I think the format is super item reliant right now, so item lock and also Trash Avalanche could both potentially be pretty disastrous for some decks. But yeah, so like there's a lot of big basic decks that if you just counter catch or something up and lock it, and also ability lock them, so like Muck, Turbo Dark, like Mewtwo and Mew tag team decks, like Rayquaza, and then you just go in with some Silent Fears until everything's knocked out. I think that could be a viable strategy if people aren't prepared for it. And next we've got Shock Lock's right here. We can just click right to it. So next is Shock Lock. Jonathan Croxton, I believe, got 3 top 8s with it last year in the second half of the season. And it's all play from a few other players, but he was the consistent Shock Lock player. It was a very oppressive deck last year, but now we have Stealthy Hood, which can protect the Virizion techs. So basically, just going into this deck, not a lot of people know how it works. The Shock Lock player wants to Evo Shock to paralyze the opponent's active Pokemon. have Stoutland active so they cannot play supporters to get out of the paralysis. And then after applying the paralysis with Evo Shock, you de-evolution spray to put the Raichu back into your hand. And then you use Memory Energy, which allows you to use the attacks of your prior evolutions, to use Lillipump's Pickup to get the evolution spray back, and then you just continuously Evo Shock your opponent. Now, if you're playing against a Rayquaza deck with a Virizion EX, Verdant Wind takes off special conditions as long as it has a Grass Energy, so you can use Alolan Muck. But now there's Stealthy Hood, which I mentioned. So I do have the Field Blower and the Faba in here. But this deck will never be too popular just because it plays for Tropical Beach, and if it's not playing the beaches, it's suboptimal. And Tropical Beach is a lot of money, so it keeps players away from playing it. But this is definitely somewhat viable. I don't think it's nearly as strong as it was last year, but it is somewhat viable. So, like I said, baseline list. If you're interested in Shock Lock, here you go. Next is Zorro Garb, the parallel version. So the parallel version was popularized by DDG last year at the end of the season. I've definitely changed it up a bit. Their Zorro Garb parallel list was very, very refined to the meta. So it was made for like the Zorro Garb mirror matches. It had bodybuilding dumbbells, heavy parallel, things like that. I've kept the parallel build since that's what this is, the Zora Garb with parallel over Skyfield. But I do not think this is the stronger variant at the moment, since parallel was really good versus other Zoroarks, and Zoroark is definitely on the decline, if anything. I've added a red card because I think red card Toxin is very strong, as is N Toxin. I believe I cut down a Psychic Energy in favor of a Super Rod. In favor of having the Hard Energy, we'll have more resources here. I added Klefki so you don't have to float your Garbotoxin and potentially lock yourself, which is something that definitely happened a lot with Zora Garb in the past. But not too many changes. Like I said, they played bodybuilding dumbbells last season. I have Choice Band. You're never going for one-shots in this deck since you're playing parallel but over Skyfield, but you can't even two-shot most tag teams with 120-120, so you actually do need the Choice Band if you want to two-shot tag teams with your Zoroark GX. And it's also playing two Trashalanche Garbodor, going a little more aggressive, but you could definitely opt for double Toxin instead of double Trash if the ability lock is more important to you as a player and into the matchups you're expecting. Next, we've got Zorro Garb Skyfield. So this is the list I think is stronger right now for Zora Garbodor. We're playing 3 Skyfield instead of 3 Parallel City, and that is the main difference between these decks. This one, I believe, has 1 extra Pokemon search. There was more room since this one is not playing the hue like Zora Garb Parallel is. And other than that, it's very, very similar, except you can actually go for 210 with your Zoroark. So if you like soften something up earlier, even with a very weak Riotous Beating early on, you can hit them harder with the Choice Band, going up to 210. But still, 210 is not as good as it was, which is why Zoroark is kind of on the decline, and also Zoroark's HP being 210 is also kind of low. So you have, like, it's not really low, but you have a moderate damage output at a moderate HP, and there's tag team Pokemon with higher HP that are basic Pokemon, and they also do they also have higher damage outputs as well. So you have to hope that your mid-rangey controlness of this deck can get you through, which is why we have the red card and the N and the Toxin. So you kind of have to try to cheese your opponent by stopping them from playing abilities. But I don't like to say cheesing them because it is hard to get through the early to mid game with Zora Garbodor. And then once you get to the end game and they've taken a lot of prizes, you can just go N Toxin, and if it sticks, you can run through them as long as your board got set up right. Next is Pikarom, and in my opinion, Pikarom is very bad in Expanded at the moment, but I know people do want to see lists for it, and so I have just that for you. I've put in the Jolteon EX because Rays and Darkrai's and even other Pikaroms that aren't teching for Jolteon EX, you can just get an auto win off of them. If they do something like use their Dead End GX on your Pikarom and they don't know that you're playing Jolteon, and you just go bench Jolteon, Tapu Koko Prism, attach Cassius, your other Pokemon, into your deck, and then just go Flash Ray until the game's over. Nothing is too crazy about this list, honestly. We've added a Dene and Electromagnetic Radar since we didn't have that the last time Pikarom was in Expanded, and I've also added Alolan Raichu, since Lightning Ride, if you need to one-shot something rather than go for the bench, Lightning Ride does a lot of damage. Paralysis is not as strong as it is in Standard since we have Guzma and Acerola. I do think Tag Bolt honestly has some potential since people are cutting bench protection from their lists, because bench protection doesn't help versus Archies anymore since they're using Cross Division now. So you can use a bench barrier to protect against Wailord, but then they just go ahead and use Espeoxys as instead. And Pikarom is like at an all-time low in its hype and Expanded, so I don't think people are teching for the Mews and the Mr. Mimes for this. So Tag Bolt might actually end up being strong just because of how weak it seems, if that makes sense. Next, I have Hitmonwob, which is another deck that I don't think is as strong as it once was, if you even consider it to have been strong at one point. I really liked this deck last season. It got 8th and 9th at Hartford. I've made some changes to it. Let's see. I added the... Oh, no, this is not the right Hitmonwob. Sorry about that. This is the correct Hitmonwob. Here we go. So last year I was playing the Mr. Mime Scoop Up block, and I'm not sure if other players were, but this helped a lot against Archies, because they were playing Acerola. The Kecleon helped a lot against Trashalanche, but now this can actually OHKO an unsuspecting Mewtwo and Mew tag team if you attach Counter Energy and they have Dimension Valley in play. Since you color change to be the same type as your opponent's active, Kecleon is Psychic and its attacks cost 1 colorless less, and you attach Counter Energy that counts as 2 Psychic, and you can just copy Mewtwo and Mew's GX attack for 200. And of course, if they do not have a Jirachi GX or a Weakness Guard Energy, you will one-shot them by attacking to copy their GX attack. Or if they were previously damaged, you could just choice ban and do 230 with that. Otherwise, the deck has not really changed too much or gained much. You could put a Buzzwole Pheromosa Tag Team GX in this deck, but I kind of like to stray away from Buzzwole Pheromosa since I feel like this deck suffers late game, and it's already hard enough to find the things you need late game for the deck. But you could possibly add the Buzzwole Pheromosa, since that is a tool that we did not have last season for the deck. Maybe it could help the deck revitalize just a bit. If you were going to play the Buzzwole Pheromosa, you're usually trying to get like a cheesy extra prize off of like a single prizer or something, so the Muscle Band could be okay to keep in if you're using Buzzmosa. Or like I said, just chip away at things and then maybe you clean up with the Buzzwole Pheromosa. Next, I have Archies, which I think is a very overbearing archetype right now, but the games with it are pretty volatile, and which makes me not like it. Like, some games you just literally don't get to play the game because you did not get it Archies. So, getting out Blastoise allows you to play the game, and sometimes you just get hands that do not allow you to empty your hand down to one card, and that one card is a Versus Seeker or an Archies or a Lele. But the games you do, the deck feels amazing. We're playing Mewtwo and Mew as basically the deck's main attacker now. I have kept the Wailord and Magikarp tag team in the deck just in case going in with Mewtwo is a bad idea. If your opponent is playing something Psychic type like Trashalanche or their own Mewtwo and Mew and they do not bench the Jirachi. But even against Mewtwo and Mew, sometimes if you are just the first to attack, you can just hit them for weakness, they hit you back for weakness, that you hit them for weakness, and the game's already over. The Naganadel GX is pretty cool. You can Venom Shot 170 to kill a Dedenne, a Lele, or a Shaman, which are almost always going to be on the bench. They're extremely popular right now. Single prizers aren't that popular, and most decks are playing Shaman, Lele, and Dedenne in some combination. The Kingdra GX Hydro Pump is really, really good. If I was not playing the Magikarp Wailord, I would play a second Kingdra, or if I was not playing the Naganadel, I would play a second Kingdra, just because the games where I actually get to Archie's the Kingdra onto my bench and swing with it, that's really, really good. It's only 2 prizes, so you can go like Mewtwo, then Kingdra, then Mewtwo. The Tina is still really good to have in the deck. I've won a couple games in testing by going like Distortion Door pings and then cross division 10 and 10 on Shamans. I've never used Towering Splash since adding the Muse and the Espeoxys. Volcanion is a nice setup for bench damage with cross division if you don't get an explosive turn 1, but you still get the Archies and can use Sauna Blast. Jet Geyser can be okay sometimes. And then also this deck gains Stealthy Hood, which is really, really good. So it stops Alolan Muck from shutting off your Mewtwo, and it stops Garbatoxin from shutting off your Mewtwo and your Blastoise. It stops Wobbuffet from shutting off your Blastoise. So this deck can kind of feel unstoppable. It can definitely get locked late game by the control decks, but you can also just kind of blow them out with cross division in the early game. Next, I've got Buzzle Garbodor, the non-GX Buzzle Garbodor. So, normally I would refer to this as Buzzgarb Shrine, but this one is Power Plant heavy. My friend Jake Keebler gave this to me. Well, he gave me a deck similar to it, and I made some changes. This was the list I used in my recent Buzzle Garbodor video on this channel. So I'm not going to go into it too much since I already did that deck profile on it. But I think this deck is stronger than people are giving it credit for. The Let Loose Power Plant is kind of insane. And there's such a high usage of items right now, and decks that are built being item reliant. So just going in with 3 Trashalanches can win you the game. We've got Turbo Dark, which is a very good deck and very popular that's weak to fighting, and so just going in with 4 Buzzwoles is it's a really favored matchup there. If you power plant the Mewtwo's Jirachi and then Trashalanche them, you're usually getting a knockout versus Mewtwo since it's weak. And Mr. Mime stops your opponent from healing their Pokemon essentially with something like Acerola. And oh yeah, and I'm playing the Pheromosa Buzzwole in here for Beast Game. Yeah, like I said, I did a full deck profile and gameplay with this video, with this deck in a video last week. Next, I have Mewtwo Mega Guardi. Here we go. So Mewtwo Mega Guardi, I've seen people thinking that this deck is insane, and I've seen people saying that this deck is just a pile of cards. So there's a large spectrum of thoughts and opinions in the community on this particular archetype. There's also been several deck profiles on it. JW over at Flex Daddy Righteous, I think Danny Altavia, No Leaks, Azul probably did a video, I think Tablemon did a video. So basically your turn 1 is insane versus evolution decks or small single prizers or Sable Garb, because you can go like quad Distortion Door and then just clean up whatever you want with Lost Boomerang doing 50 and 50, and then they go to the Lost Zone if they were knocked out. So Zorak decks, you just get you only need 1 Distortion Door and you go Lost Boomerang, and 2 Zoruas are sent to the Lost Zone. Against Sable Garb, you can do it to do Trubbishes. Absol is like Grimsley. When you play it down, you can move 3 damage counters from one of your opponent's Pokemon to another of their Pokemon. And then all of these like Pokemon you don't actually want on your board, you just copy Despair Ray for a single energy with D-Valley and just clear them off your board and do extra damage to your opponent. So you're spreading damage to the bench while you're also doing moderate damage to the active. If you don't do an early lost Boomerang, you can use Black Ray GX to do 100 to all of your opponent's GXs and EXs. And over the course of the game, you probably build up some damage with Distortion Doors. So you can take knockouts that way, especially if they benched Shamans, Dedenes, and Lele's. And you have a few annoying attacks. You have Bright Tone 50, and then you can't be hit by GX and EX. Sonic Edge goes through effects like Bright Tone. And then Distort stops your opponent from playing items next turn, and Sonic Volume stops your opponent from playing special energy cards next turn. Magierna is good because it means you cannot get Raticated. I think it's called Hyperfang on the rat that's in Zorro Rats. They go laser and then put you down to 10 HP, but this stops you from going down to 10 HP. And of course the Stealthy Hood, like I had in the Archie's lists, because yeah, you don't want to lose your ability. That's kind of the whole thing. Next I've got Mew Hand Control, which this idea comes from a video on Azul's channel. I definitely changed the list up a bit. I also don't think this is very strong, but I've seen people asking for the list. I've seen people saying that this idea sounds insane. I don't think it's actually that good. It's pretty fragile. Excuse me. Your game plan is to go let loose your opponent down to 4, and then unfair GX 2 of their good cards out of their hand. If you get the let loose and the Mars to discard a random card and the unfair GX, that's just crazy. Like, that's really good. Chip Chip Ice Axe to control their top deck. You can use Hiker the turn after to control their next top deck if you've essentially given them the dead hand. And then after you've given them the dead hand with that combo with unfair GX, you just go in with Emerald Breaks or Riotous Beatings or Quaking Punches. I threw the one Zoroark in here just in case you whiff the second attachment. Because if you whiff the second attachment, you can't use Emerald Break. And then you would have to use Riotous Beating, since we're playing Skyfield over D-Valley. And then Quaking Punch is also solid, but it kind of sucks having Toad over Noivern in here because you can start Toad and you kind of don't want that. Other than that, this deck can just effectively like win from turn 1. If you get the lock, then you get the Hiker or the Chip Chip again next turn to lock them 2 turns in a row, and you've started attacking. You're so far ahead at that point that you're probably going to win unless something goes really, really wrong. But I do think the deck is fragile, and it doesn't get the turn 1 off enough, in my opinion, to be like super viable. Next is another Mewtwo. We got Mew Plume. Again, this deck has been profiled. Lists have been posted a lot. This is like a known archetype. You copy Super Growth, or you just use the Super Growth if you start with Rowleg to search for Gloom onto Oddish, then Vileplume onto Gloom, and you got the turn 1 item lock with Irritating Pollen. So we play heavy supporters and no Versus Seekers like Plume decks in the past have. You do have to play some items just to get set up. But from there, you just copy Bright Tone to lock your opponent from swinging with GXs and EXs, and you've already item locked them. If they swing into you and their Pokemon is clean, you can damage change to just move all of your damage over to them. Infinite Force can be an okay attack sometimes, and you can use Kaleidostorm to conserve your energy to the bench, so then when you Acerola, you're not also picking up your energy. And then also Calming Hurricane 150 and heal 30 is not the worst attack. Zeraora is there to give you free retreat. Magierna prevents all the effects like I mentioned earlier, and Jirachi stops your Mewtwo from having weakness. This is solid, but the games you don't get the turn 1 Plume, like, your deck just feels like crap. Going first, and then your opponent gets to use items and attack. Going first actually feels kind of weird because you can't get the plume out going first. You can only get it out going second. So your opponent gets to both play their items and attack in the same turn before the plume comes down. This isn't one of my favorite decks, but I definitely think it's going to see play at Richmond and Portland. I think we're getting towards the end here. Still got a handful of decks. Next is Turbo Dark. So I really like this list, and I really like Turbo Dark. I think this deck is really strong. It shouldn't be underestimated just because it's a big basic deck. The deck is pretty darn nuts. You get a lot of energy. Turn 1 and turn 2. You got 4 max elixirs for Dark Patch. Zoro Ninja is doing 30 plus 30 more times the amount of dark energy attached to all of your Pokemon, which is such a big boost from the old 20 plus 20 from the old Turbo Dark attacker, which was a Darkrai EX. And then Darkrai GX, Dead End GX, if your opponent's active is affected by a special condition, it's knocked out. This is just a huge bomb to drop on your opponent if you either didn't get enough energy down, or they just have like a big Mewtwo with a Fighting Fury belt on it and they don't have a Magierna on their bench. Then you just go Laser Dark End GX. The lasers are also pretty effective throughout the game, even when you're not dead ending GX. Dead End GXing. Because the poison chip damage does matter in the early game, and the sleep can be really annoying. We're playing a Mew, the Memories of Dawn, to copy the attack of any basic Pokemon we have in play. So you can just copy Dark Pulse from a 1-prizer, which is really strong. And I have this Mew, the bench barrier here, in case of Naganadel GXs to snipe our bench, so they can't just get around our big Pokemon with 250 HP, 290 with a belt. Or in the off chance that we do play against a Pikarom, double E power, and then hit the Dead AGX on the bench would be pretty disastrous because they'd be down to only a single prize left after that. But yeah, like I said, this deck is really strong. I mentioned the Ranger when I was talking about Ray. It's really good here as well. Next, I have Zurich Seismitoad. Zorotoad won a few regionals last year in the hands of the DDG players. I didn't change too much since then. I did have Alolan Muck, so we got the 1/1 Muck line and the Ditto here. We're keeping the lasers in the Verbanks. I tried Silent Labs. I tried Silent Labs and the Ninetales to block stadiums, but this deck is just really weak without the Laser Bank combo. So you can try the power of Alchemy and then just blower the Mewtwo's Stealthy Hoods. Other than that, deck has not changed too much, though. Sable Garb. I've been practicing with this deck a lot because I think it's strong and it's also a very high skill cap. Very rewarding to play. You use Junk Hunt to just get back broken items every turn. Garbotoxin to lock your opponent. Trashalanche to just sweep the board if you need to. And you go for the Chip Ice Axe, their top deck after you reset stamp them to a low hand. You can Lieutenant Surge, Mars Hiker, Mars versus Seeker Mars Flare Grunt. You have a lot of potential combos here, and sometimes if you run them out of stadiums, you can just go in with the Black Market Prism, and they stop taking prizes even if you don't lock them. They're not taking prizes off of your Sableye anymore. And then Girafarig's also really good versus Mew 3 decks. Yeah, so this deck is really degenerate, really good, but if you don't play it optimally, it just feels like a pile of cards. Next, we got Zoroark Control. Also, this is very similar to Sableye Garbodor. You're just drawing more cards with Zoroark and then resource managing them with Oranguru, instead of locking their abilities with Garb and getting the items directly back to your hand. You're still doing the Counter Catcher, Reset Stamp, Chip Ice Axe, Lieutenant Surge, Mars. You're doing all of that. You just have draw power and you're putting resources at the bottom instead of the Garbotoxin lock and putting items directly to your hand. So the deck definitely has some trade-offs and differences, but you're doing effectively the same thing as you are with Sable Garb with Zora Control. And now these last two are ones that I kind of made last minute, so these are completely theoried out. This is a Drampa Garb with a mix of Power Plant and Dimension Valley. Drampa Garb may have some merit in this format because Righteous Edge gets energy off of Mewtwo's, off of Sableye with Rainbow Energies, things like that. Garbotoxin, of course, is very good paired with something like 4 Ns in the deck. And this is a nice combo. Blackray GX, if they have Shamans down, or honestly, there's a lot of decks in this format are filling up their board with GXs, like Mewtwo, Turbo Dark, Ray. So if you Blackray GX them, they knock it out, then you just magical swap for your prizes. So I'm playing the 2 Dimension Valley and also the Dowsing Machine, but then versus things like Zoric decks and Mewtwo decks, you can go Righteous Edge their energy, end them, play down a Power Plant, and attach for Garbotoxin. So they have to get their energy, they have to get the Stadium out of play, and they have to get the tool off of Garbotoxin. And this is all after you probably end them. And also we have 2 Fighting Fury belts, so your Drampas are actually 220 HP, which is pretty solid still in this format. And then since we're playing the Dimension Valley, I threw in a Copycat Mimikyu because this card situationally pretty strong. And lastly, I have one more Mew 3 variant, which is Mew Mill. So this is a Mill deck. This is completely theoried out. I have not played a game with this deck. Just fair warning, but I have seen other YouTubers and streamers play with the deck. And people just talk about it in theory. So the plan is you use Melting Horn every turn, discard the top 2 cards of your opponent's deck. You have Team Rocket's Handiworks as well. Oh, excuse me. And then your big finisher is Raging Out GX. From Charizard GX, discard the top 10 cards of your opponent's deck. So you just copy all this with Mewtwo with a belt on it, and then you're max potting and Ace of Rolling as you go. I threw in this Mega Mewtwo EX, so it's Psychic Affinity. This attack does 30 more damage times the amount of energy attached to both active Pokemon. So in case you do need to attack instead of milling, this is not a bad attacker. And then our energy is 7 fire, 2 DCE, so you can either just attach over time or have an attachment to the bench Mewtwo and an attachment to the active. Then when you max potion each turn, you just reapply an energy to the active. And then when you're ready for Raging Out, you just attach a DCE. And then I do have a fair amount of removal things and stall things, so we have Counter Catcher to bring something up. We have the ends, we have the Hue in case they have a big hand and they're just holding on to it, planning to shuffle their hand back in. We can Hue them and then next turn go Raging Out. And so yeah, this is just a really cool concept. I'm not sure how great it is in practice though. So I hope you guys enjoyed this kind of list drop video. And like I said, I will have the Google sheet in the description below, and it will have all of these listed out, and you can just copy the row or the column that the list is in and import them into PTCGO if you'd like. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time here on Celio's Network.